makes sense. What does not make any sense are the results on the right. These are basically all these conditions where Fred has not chosen. So we read the essay or we see Fred say it, but we are led to believe that it's not actually Fred's words or opinion, and yet even though we're led to believe that, we still cannot help but think that the essay somehow reflects Fred's true opinion, as indicated by the fact that when you see him reading a pro-Castro speech or writing one, you say he's pro-Castro, and an anti-Castro speech, you think he's anti-Castro. The accurate answer on the right should be that there's no difference between the groups, and they're both somewhere in the middle because you basically have no idea. But the fact is that people attribute some attitudes toward Fred. They make a dispositional attribution, even though there's strong situational factors that played a role, like being assigned what to write. So this is supporting the fundamental attribution error because we're deciding that Fred is the kind of person that believes what's in the essay, even though at the same time we're ignoring the strong situational factors that Fred had no choice. So it's really not giving us any information. This is a reminder that once you are associated with something, people will believe it's who you are and what you believe, even if there are clear situational factors clear to you that are leading you to be associated with that thing. So this is why people in public relations try to keep their clients very far away from anything controversial, because you just sort of attach the thing to the person and think it's a dispositional thing, even when there are situational factors. Any questions about the fundamental attribution error? So that's a bias in how we understand other people's behavior. At the same time that researchers were interested in how we make attributions for other people's behavior, they also started to be interested in how we understand ourselves and how we make attributions for our own behavior. Sort of, at first, people were mostly just interested in attributions for other people's behavior, and they found there was this huge bias to over-align dispositional attributions and ignore situational influences. But then they thought, well, what about ourselves? Do we make attributions for ourselves like we make attributions for other people? The first big area of research that looked at attribution for ourselves was sort of not the parallel to the fundamental attribution error, so we'll come to that later. That's the actor-observer bias. The first big area of research in attributions that we make for ourselves had to do with this weird question of how do we know what we're feeling? It may seem like a silly question, how do we know what we're feeling? We just, you might say, well, we just know. Like, if I'm feeling sad, how do I know that? Well, I just know that I'm sad. Or if I'm feeling angry, how do I know that? I just somehow know that I'm angry. Now, in the days of the sort of social cognitive revolution in social psychology, that answer, that how do we know something? Well, we just know, not very satisfying answer. Researchers wanted to understand what's the process by which we decide that we are sad or angry. Put another way, what leads us in a particular moment, in a particular situation, to make an attribution for how we're feeling that we feel angry, or we feel sad, or we feel happy? And so one hypothesis that was proposed is that how we make attributions for our own feelings was proposed by Schachter and Singer, and is known as the two-factor theory. The reason it's called the two-factor theory is that Schachter and Singer argue that when we decide what we're feeling, it's actually based on two sources of information. The first source of information that we use to decide how we're feeling is our physiological arousal. What is our body doing? Is our body calm? Is our body really revved up? Is our heart racing? Are we sweating? Do we feel flushed? Or are we relatively calm? So the first order of information is what is our body doing? Our physiological arousal. And some people might say, well, that's it. How we know that we're angry is our body's revved up. How we know we're happy is that our body feels calm. Schachter and Singer argue that that information, what your body is telling you, is not enough. It's not sufficient to make an attribution for what you're actually feeling. Instead, you need to put that information from your body together with situational information. So it's a two-factor theory because what they argue is to decide what we're feeling, we combine information from our body in terms of how physiologically aroused we are with information about the situation that we are in, and those two pieces of information together lead us to make an attribution of how we're feeling. So for example, let's say your body feels really jittery. Chapter and Singer, and you feel sort of revved up. Your heart's racing, you feel tense and flushed. Chapter and Singer would say that without knowing the situation, you'd have no idea what you're feeling. So that same feeling, that same body state, if somebody has just insulted you, you're going to interpret your physiological arousal state as reflecting the fact that you're feeling angry. However, that very same physiological sensation, if you happen to be sitting next to somebody that you think is attractive, you're going to interpret that arousal very differently. You're going to think that you're attracted to that person. So same body experience could be interpreted as anger or attraction. We'll come back to that when we talk about attraction, sex, and love, because it turns out there's a whole lot of research about the fact that we can't actually be tricked into thinking we're attracted to somebody. But for the moment, the point is that our body is only one source of information. We need the situation to make sense of what our body is telling us, and that's why we only can figure out what we're feeling based on these two sources of information. Now, the thing is that most of the time, the two pieces of information go together. So usually there is a correspondence between the situation and what our body is doing. So what Chapter and Singer tried to figure out was a way of teasing apart the separate contribution of body state and situation to see if they could really show that both of these are necessary for attributing what we're feeling, to show that you have to mess with them. But most of the time they go together. So how do they mess with them? What I'll tell you about now is a very, very famous study that they did. It's referred to as the Chapter and Singer study, or the study of misattribution of arousal. Because what they tried to do was to get people to sort of mess with these two things, to get them to work independently, and to see how changing one or the other would lead to differences in people's attribution of what they're feeling. So it's a sort of complicated setup, but I think that you'll get the message, and it's also creative and somewhat humorous and ridiculous. Here's how they set up their experiments so they could manipulate the situation and arousal separately. Subjects were run one at a time, and they were put in a waiting room with a confederate where they both filled out a questionnaire. So you're a subject in the study, you come to the lab, you're there, your job is to fill out the questionnaire, and you're in a room with one other person that you think is another subject, but is really a confederate.